Hi, and thank you so much for popping by. My name is Dr. Bita Balozi. Do feel free to call me Dr. Balozi or Dr. Bui. On my mind today is Botswana Television. And obviously, it means I saw something on Botswana Television which inspired me to have this discussion today. Now, typically, Botswana Television covers government, it covers government programs, it covers government politicians. It typically is basically the mouthpiece for the Botswana government. Now, I was actually surprised a few days ago when I came across an interview on Botswana Television, which was with Benson Putego Benson, a very popular Botswana television presenter, and he was having a conversation with a private sector political analyst. And it was very interesting because that conversation went on for about 30 minutes or more than 30 minutes, that they were talking about the former ruling party, which is the Botswana Democratic Party. They were talking about an event which the Botswana Democratic Party was hosting or had hosted, and they were talking about the results of that particular meeting. So I thought, oh, hey, this is so great. This is amazing. These are the green flags that we would like to see, right? And no worries with that. And then I looked back at some more news coverage where I found that actually President Boko has intentions of making Botswana television or Botswana government media more public in orientation. I thought, okay, this is good signals. These are the green lights we are looking to see. But within all of this, which is happening, within these green lights is one major red light. And in May, he declared that, 90% of Botswana news coverage is in fact fake news or lies or fabricated. I was pleasantly surprised because, first and foremost, I did not anticipate that the newly elected president of Botswana would so soon after his history-making election declare the media as enemy number one. So I was surprised, but when I looked at research actually shows that this is typical of presidents or leaders in the Southern African region. In fact, not just the Southern African region, but in the sub-Saharan African region. So from all the way to South Africa, from all the way in South Africa, coming up to Botswana, all the way to Zimbabwe, as you go up to Kenya, Uganda, this is typical of leaders. They typically see the private sector media as enemy number one. Now, I was surprised by this because of all the governments in the Southern African region, I would have imagined that President Boko's government would absolutely understand the importance of the dissenting voices, because they are actually coming in having served as the opposition for close to 60 years, right? So you would imagine that this particular party would have a different stance towards the private sector media. But unfortunately, this new government of Botswana is actually typical. I'm wondering what this means for the private sector media. Let me see what I wrote here. Yeah, so, and although I applaud the fact that there are reports that the president wants to actually make Botswana Television more of a public-orientated institution, I applaud that. That's great intentions. But that doesn't take away the role and the function of the private sector media, because actually the private sector media is the one that is likely always going to be reporting without fear or favor, right? Because we already know that even though Botswana Television may have some of the best professionals in terms of journalism, they may have some of the best professionals in terms of journalism working for government radio stations, government newspapers, government television stations. We know that their hands are a little bit tied, right? They do not have the capacity to necessarily report without fear or favor. And this is why the private sector media is critical, regardless of whether the current government is going to be or intends to make the government-owned radio stations, television stations, newspaper stations into more public-orientated entities. It doesn't take away the function and the role of the private sector media, which I'm going to stress again. This is the only media that will actually report without fear or favor. This is the only media that is going to really tell us who Moti is to the new government. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because there's this big story about Zunaid Moti, a businessman who has his roots in South Africa, but his business entities are actually reported as having roots in South Africa. He's got a little bit of roots in Botswana, Zimbabwe, etc. So I know for a fact that these are the conversations that the private sector media is going to be the one that will have the courage to report on, right? So this is why I find it interesting that within a very few moments of gaining power, the current president of Botswana is seeing Botswana media as enemy number one. But like I'm saying, this is not surprising. This is actually typical of Southern African leaders. When they get into power, they look around and they identify the media as enemy number one. And in the case of Botswana, I'm pleasantly surprised because I thought this government would appreciate the function and the role of the dissenting voice. Yeah, right? And that this particular government, I was expecting a lot more from it. I thought it was mature enough to understand the role of the private sector media. Now, I'm going to emphasize with Zunaid Moti, right? Zunaid Moti is considered to be a close associate to the current ruling party. He was a close associate to this current ruling party even before they came into power. So before the UDC came into power, Zunaid Moti had a relationship with Boko and the opposition, right? And this is why I'm quite sure that the private sector media is the only one that is going to actually have the capacity, the courage to actually report on the intricacies of Zunaid Moti's relationship with the current government, right? So I'm just saying this because I'm a little disappointed. I'm absolutely a little disappointed that within a very short period of time, private sector media is now enemy number one, right? I thought the UDC would understand absolutely that, it's unjust to shut out the dissenting voices. It's absolutely unjust. So yeah, this is what was on my mind. I really was pleasantly surprised by that. But at the same time, I do see some indicators. I can see the indicators that, Botswana Television is having almost 32 minutes of conversation between the Botswana Television news presenter and a private sector analyst, political analyst, and they're thrashing out a meeting that was held by the Botswana Democratic Party and really getting into some of those details. But I am saying that I don't expect the same level of interrogation to be happening in context to the role of Zunaid Moti, right? The businessman, the philanthropist who's closely associated with the Umbrella for Democratic Change and with President Boko. I don't expect them as government leader to interrogate that relationship in the same way that the private sector media would do, because the private sector media in this case are reporting without fear or favor or bias towards the government, right? And that is the function, to be critically analyzing these relationships. If we are talking about corruption, which is the problem I have with any government, especially as it affects the underserved and marginalized populations. If we're talking about corruption, I don't anticipate Botswana Television to be layering out, the issues to do with Moti, to be layering out the issues to do with this direct tender appointments, etc. So this is why, for me, I thought this is rather unjust. This is rather uncouth. This is absolutely not what I was expecting from a political party that I thought, is mature enough, is confident enough. They have seen, the UDC as a party have seen the benefits of a free press. They know this because they've been working in partnership with the private media for so many years. They absolutely know the benefits of the dissenting voice in terms of public interest, right? But I'm now surprised to hear that 90%. Yeah, I'm just really surprised by the turnaround, what looks like a real quick turnaround. And as I've said before, a healthy journalism is a healthy Botswana. A healthy media is a healthy Botswana. And if there is any ruling party within the Southern African region or the Sub-Saharan African region that knows the essence of that statement, it is this current government. We have been opposing for more than 60 years and only came into power 7 months ago. But within the 7 months, the same president has quickly turned around and said, the media, enemy number one, 90% fabricated, 90% fake news. I think the other unfair thing is that, when you look at these media in Southern Africa, these government-owned radio stations, television stations, newspapers in Southern Africa, they are typically more resourced than the journalists in the private sector. The media organizations that are owned by Botswana Television, for example, Botswana Television, for example, it can reach many more audiences than the private sector media. They have more resources, they have more access, right? And this is why it's disappointing when these national-owned or government-owned radio stations are only portraying government programs, mananeo a governmente, yeah, it's and not just reach, but the quality. Botswana Television is such good quality. So I'm going to share the research here, which is really talking about, just the history of Botswana Television and its association to the ruling parties and its association to government mandates, right? And please, you must remember that the journalists that work for Botswana Television, the journalists that work for Daily News are some of the best journalists that we have. But unfortunately, their hands are tied. They really have very limited scope. And this is why we really need to be nurturing the private sector media, protecting them so that they can really interrogate these issues of corruption, because we are not expecting the Botswana Television to report negatively on the government. That's not going to happen. We expect Botswana Television to continue to shine the bright light of Botswana government and its wonderful initiatives that it does for the people. So we are not going to expect the Botswana government media to start really giving us insider details on who Moti is and his role in this new government, right? So yeah, that's all I had on my mind today about Botswana Television, the new government, and media freedom. Alrighty, thank you so much, my friend. I hope you're having a lovely day where you are, but most importantly, I hope you're having a healthy day wherever you're watching me from. Bye.